The NBA's opening night featured two incredibly entertaining matchups featuring four top teams this year, but then the next night, we finally got to see most of the rest of the league kick off their seasons, and with a massive slate on Wednesday, we got a ton of incredible basketball across the board. The first outing may not tell the whole story with so much basketball left to be played, but it can give us our first look at what teams do well and where they struggle, and with this comes individual standouts for better and for worse, which brings us to today's video. Today we will be picking out the four biggest winners and the four biggest losers of the opening slate of games. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but it also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. Starting with the first big winner of the opening slate, we have VJ Edgecombe of the Philadelphia 76ers. I'm not exaggerating when I say that VJ Edgecombe just had the greatest NBA debut I have ever seen in my entire life. The third pick in this year's draft came out in Philadelphia's starting lineup and played as though he's been in the league for 8 years, with zero fear at all and without any hesitation in his play, which is practically unheard of for a rookie getting his first taste of action at this level. He was decisive every time he got the ball. His ability to attack the rim at will was looking easier than anyone thought it would be for him right away. He was soaring to the basket, throwing down powerful dunks, and he even stayed under control when the paint clogged up, showing off a smooth pull-up jumper in the mid-range and a few floaters to go along with it. Plus, he made Boston pay when they played off of him, hitting 5 threes in the contest as well. On the game as a whole, VJ Edgecombe had 34 points, which is the third most amount of points any rookie has ever had in the first game they've played in NBA history, which is just wild to think about. Edgecombe is already a plus defender, he's a top-tier competitor with a non-stop motor, and the Rookie of the Year award may be in sights for him, which, speaking of, right now Edgecombe is viewed as the second most likely player to take that award home, behind Cooper Flagg, and Edgecombe has plus 175 odds on Bet Online to win the Rookie of the Year, so if you think VJ can keep this level of play up and maybe surpass Cooper Flagg in the race, now may be the time to head over and take advantage of that. Now over to our first loser of the opening slate, we actually have Edgecombe's teammate on the Philadelphia 76ers, Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid's last year has been incredibly difficult, dealing with knee problems that stem from over a year ago when he tore his meniscus. That injury never quite healed right when he tried to rush back to the court last season and had to be shut down after playing just 19 games, and over the last 8 months, he's pretty much focused solely on rehabbing that knee, hoping to get back to a level where he could return to the team. I think most of us went into his return understanding that his MVP days are likely behind him, but at the very least, the hope was that he could maneuver around the court more comfortably and without any painful setbacks, but in that opening game against the Celtics, Joel just looked bad. He was unable to impose himself physically, he looked slower, and the quality of shots he was generating was pretty poor, with most of the 9-shot attempts that he took being deep jumpers from the perimeter, tightly contested. It was announced before the game that Joel Embiid would be on a minutes restriction, and he only played 20 minutes in the game, sticking to that plan. But the Sixers were better with him off the floor, and he overall scored just 4 points, shooting 1 for 9 from the field. He's still way further away from returning to form than many hoped he would be, and now figuring out a way to balance his minutes with the team's goals is going to be a tricky one. Now back to our next big winner of the opening slate, we have Victor Wembanyama of the San Antonio Spurs. Wembanyama's season was cut short last year due to an unfortunate blood clotting issue in February, so it had been a while since we've seen him on the floor, and after all of the aggressive moves that the Spurs have made to try to elevate themselves into the playoff picture, a lot of pressure was on Wemby to come back even stronger, to take a leap to true superstardom and be the face of the franchise game changer everyone knew he could be when he was drafted. The Spurs opened their season up against the Dallas Mavericks, featuring Anthony Davis, who you would think would be one of the league's best defenders to potentially slow Wembanyama down. That, however, did not happen. Everyone who watched that game probably came away from it stunned at how insane Wembanyama went from start to finish. This guy looked like a superhuman specimen created in a lab to dominate the game of basketball, and there were just no answers for him at all. Wemby dropped 40 points and 15 rebounds, throwing down outrageous dunks through traffic, hitting a ridiculous end-one three, catching lobs, and making the game look easy. He legitimately may be ready to join MVP conversations, and that elevates the Spurs' ceiling quite a bit. Now for our next loser of the opening slate, we have the Cooper Flagg point guard experiment. Cooper Flagg himself isn't necessarily someone who walks away from the opening slate in the loser column. It's the game plan that the Mavericks coach Jason Kidd tried to implement that does. The Mavericks went with a starting lineup of Cooper Flagg, Klay Thompson, PJ Washington, Anthony Davis, and Derek Lively. And you'll notice that there is no point guard in that group, which is because Kidd intentionally wanted to experiment with Cooper Flagg at point guard. Listen, I, like most of you, was very high on Cooper Flagg as a prospect coming out of Duke, but there was literally nothing he did last year that indicated he was anything close to a point forward. Flagg has so many strengths to try to hone in on, but being a lead ball handler and primary facilitator and playmaker is not one of them at all. In fact, the things that have gotten Flagg into trouble at times throughout his playing journey have been when he's tried to do too much over-dribbling, playing hero ball, and his court vision hasn't always been that great. In this opening game, Flagg didn't necessarily play very well, scoring just 10 points, shooting 4 for 13 from the field, but he's a rookie, and that's not really worth overreacting to. What is very notable is that despite being tasked initially with being the point guard, Flagg finished the game with 0 assists, and I just don't think the Mavericks would be wise to continue with this experiment, and instead should work more to maximize the things that he does actually do well on the offensive end instead. Now for our next winner of the opening slate, we have Ja Morant of the Memphis Grizzlies. Morant is another player who came in under the microscope a bit after a down year last season and an off-season where the Grizzlies offloaded one of his best teammates in Desmond Bane. Last season, there was some inner turmoil in the locker room, according to reports, and Morant himself wasn't happy with the way he was being used, and all of that ended with former coach Taylor Jenkins getting fired. New coach Thomas Isolo came in with a new system where the goal was to have the ball in Morant's hands more often and hopefully get him back to the form that he was in during the 2022 and 2023 seasons, because both Morant and the team have been slipping a bit over the last 2 years. Well, Morant came out against the Pelicans with a chip on his shoulder and dominated from start to finish to lead them to a W to start the year off. Ja Morant scored 35 points in the game, shooting a highly efficient 13 of 20 from the field, including 2 threes, and he also committed just 2 turnovers, playing confident and aggressive, but also more under control. If the Grizzlies want to hang around in a tough Western Conference, they need Morant on his A game, and it looks like he is ready to bounce back. Now for our next unfortunate loser from the opening slate, we have Rob Dillingham of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Rob Dillingham was the 8th overall pick in the 2024 NBA draft, going to a Timberwolves team in need of help at the point guard position. So with his creativity and natural playmaking skills as a prospect, one would have thought that he was the player the team would be grooming to take over. Mike Conley is now 38 years old, and a clear shell of his former self, no longer fit for the starting point guard job. And Minnesota is well aware of this, hence why they benched him to start the new season. Who did they bench him for, though? Well, it wasn't Dillingham who claimed the starting job, it was actually Donte DiVincenzo, who's much more of an off-ball 2-guard than a lead ball handler, but with Anthony Davis capable of leading the first unit, that could be justified. Rotations need balance, and they did still need another point guard in the mix along with Conley and DiVincenzo anyway, so surely Rob Dillingham was the other one playing minutes in the opener since they invested so heavily in him, taking him with a top 10 pick, right? Well, you would be wrong again. Instead, Bones Hyland got the rest of those spot minutes at point guard, leaving Rob Dillingham as a healthy did not play for the night. I don't want to read too much into one game's rotation, but it's hard not to acknowledge how bad of a look that is for a lottery pick to be passed up in the depth chart by a player in Bones Hyland, who spent all of last season at the end of teams' benches. And now for the final big winner of the opening slate, we have Davion Mitchell of the Miami Heat. The Heat may have lost their opening game against the Orlando Magic, but what stood out the most to me from that game is that Mitchell has finally found his footing in the league after 4 incredibly inconsistent and sometimes worrying seasons prior to this. After being selected in the lottery of the 2021 NBA draft by the Sacramento Kings, Mitchell just hadn't been able to live up to the hype he came in with. He was pegged as someone who, at minimum, could be a terrific 3-and-D guard, and ideally, the blossoming playmaking and creation skills he flashed at Baylor could continue to bloom in the NBA, but his time in Sacramento was nothing short of disappointing, where he lost confidence in his jumper, and he wasn't trusted to be a lead guard for them, and saw his minutes slip every season. Last year, he was experiencing similar struggles when he was on the Toronto Raptors, so they traded him to the Miami Heat at the trade deadline, and it was this stretch he played on the Heat at the end of last year that practically saved his NBA career. He played the best basketball of his life in those 30 games for Miami, but coming into the new season, we needed to see if he could continue that momentum before fully buying into his emergence, and after that first game against the Magic, I think it's safe to say that Mitchell is finally looking like the player he was expected to be when he got drafted in the lottery. He dropped an efficient 16 points, but what was most notable of all is that he was playing like a true point guard and dished out 12 assists, which, by the way, was more than anyone in the NBA dished out in the opening games. He's always been a lockdown defender, but now that his confidence is blooming on the offensive end, Miami found themselves a real gem. And finally, the last loser that we'll be discussing from the opening slate is the Los Angeles Clippers as a whole. Nobody suffered a more embarrassing outcome on opening night given the circumstances than the Clippers did. There's just no two ways about it. The Clippers made some of the biggest moves this offseason, including bringing in Bradley Beal, Chris Paul, John Collins, and Brook Lopez. Plus, Kawhi Leonard was finally healthy at the start of a season, Ivica Zubac had emerged as one of the best paint protectors in the league last year, and James Harden is coming off of a great all-star season, so it seemed like on paper, this was a group that was as talented as anybody. They were even given what seemed like a layup of an opening night matchup against the lowly Utah Jazz, who finished in last place in the West a year ago. And yet, based solely on the outcome of this game, you would have guessed that the Clippers were the last place team. The Jazz whooped their butt from start to finish, leading after the first quarter by 24 points and never taking their foot off the gas until the end, winning the game by 21 points. There was no synergy, they were getting out-hustled, and they're going to have to figure things out fast because the competition is only going to get tougher from here on out. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what stood out the most to you in these opening games. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.